cat. So I want to off the bat say that some of the details I'm going to talk about here were already covered in a video on the bass channel called Active Pickups Are Better Than Passive Pickups. Well, that's not my stance in this video, but I feel like I just need to cover a little bit of the details. So an active instrument is one that requires a battery. Now, there are several different iterations of an active instrument that you can come across. You can have an active bass or guitar that has an active pickup. Now, though these are EMGs, these are passive EMGs. These do not require a battery. But I bring it up to say that I think the most common active pickups on the market today are EMG and Fishman Fluence. That's for guitar and bass. These are pickups that require a battery to give you the signal that you need. They have two different approaches to the way that they do it. EMG uses an internal preamp to boost the signal of a weak pickup with not a lot of wire and not a lot of output. Fishman requires the power to do their wizardry circuitry that they have in there because they don't have copper winding. It's very interesting. Then there are instruments, mostly bass, but it's not only bass, that have passive pickups that are completely normal, but they have active electronics. Well, the active electronics, what you're going to see in most videos and explanations or whatever, is they talk about how this is the only way you can have cut and boost on an instrument. That's very true, but coming from the place of somebody who doesn't use the active for the boost purposes very much, I'm here to talk about the tonal differences between active and passive. Now, you could make this comparison between like a Stingray and a P-Bass, but you're not going to have a very good comparison there because one's active and one's passive, but they have completely different, like everything, pickup type, etc., right? So for this example, I'm going to use this bass to show you passive pickups that are run through everything passive and then run through active electronics as well. There's a tonal difference whether you boost or cut anything at all. It's not very big, but it's there. And I find that it's there on, it depends on the preamp or the active electronics that's in your bass. When you wind a pickup, it involves magnets and wire. If you want a lot of output, you have to put more wire. Usually, you can do a stronger magnet as well. It's a whole balancing act. Different types of magnets, different gauge of wire, etc., etc. The more wire you put on something, the more you change the frequency. Generally, a whole lot of wire will cause you to have a treble roll-off that can vary from pleasant to muddy. And also, a lot of wire gives you a big resonant peak. And depending on where that resonant peak lands, it can make your pickup sound really nasally or bright or something else. Because no matter what the other frequencies are doing, the one frequency that comes out of your pickup that has the most information gives it the character that it has. And that is why active pickups became a thing in the first place. They wanted to pick the resonant peak, to influence it by the means that they chose, not based on what the wire did, which is cool. There are other ways to do this, like a tone styler, which I have in here. This will affect your resonant peak and all kinds of stuff, and it's a passive thing. So just a thought, tone knobs in general, capacitors, all this stuff, they can affect your resonant peak. How much top end roll off you have, all kinds of stuff. It's pretty interesting. So you don't have to have something active to do that. What I'm getting at is every active bass I've experienced has a whole lot more information above, like let's say 1,000 hertz, 2,000 hertz. You have a lot more frequencies above that than a passive bass. And this is based on my experience, but I do know that, like, let's take a passive jazz bass, something with single coil pickups, will have a good bit of treble information, but going with an active system preserves the treble. What happens is the more electronics you have and the more pedals you have and the longer your chord is, the more of the upper end of the frequency response that you lose when you're going through something. If you have an active system, you buffer it, you remove that loss, and so we perceive it as having more treble, more definition, etc. What I've been enjoying lately is to have an active and passive bass with the intention of having a tone with a lot of treble in it and a tone without a lot of treble without having to change basses. So this is doable when you have a bass with active electronics and passive pickups. You can bypass the active part and have a true passive tone and a true active tone. This is not possible when you have active pickups. Even though Fishman builds in a passive sound and an active sound to their bass soap bars, it's still actually active all the time and still, draining your battery and stuff. And I'm not a big fan of their passive tone that they have built into theirs. I'm just not a fan of those pickups altogether. Honestly, they don't sound that bad, just they're not my thing. A lot of people will use this passive pickup active electronic system just as a backup for if their battery dies, and that's totally fine. What I'm interested in doing with it these days is just having two different tones plus the backup as well. Now, one thing I want to mess around with this test is to see if the tone that I get running these pickups through this is similar to running the pickups passive through like a pedal. Certain pedals have a buffer, and that buffer may actually cause the same treble boost that I'm talking about that comes from the preamp, and then you wouldn't have to necessarily worry about active passive, and then you could just kick a pedal on and off. I'm curious to see if it gives you the same result or not. Either way, that's a cool idea if you don't want to mess with your already existing bass, or if you just do not like the idea of having a battery in your bass, which I completely understand. I went through that phase as well. I'm a believer that it would take very little time for every instrument maker that has an active bass to put in a bypass switch. It would be easy, take little time, almost no money, but I think they leave them off just because they think everybody wants to have it active all the time. I don't know. But I do know that brands like Sire are doing a huge thing for the bass community by every single one of their active basses coming with that bypass switch right off the bat. And it's for that reason that I would recommend their M2 or M5 over this Schecter Riot, because this came active all the way from the start. I've been playing these active basses mainly lately, including the Sterling behind me, because they are the ones that stand out in the mix the most. And it just makes it easy to get that sort of tone to stand out in the mix. This kind of bass with this pickup and this position will stand out a lot even without the active electronics. So that's a pretty cool way to make your bass tone really pop out. And I'm not talking about popping out in a way that's overwhelming, but just in a way where you can hear it. So let's examine the tonal differences between active and passive basses. Now, this is from the perspective of a bass that has a completely passive system and then an active system compared back to back. You can't really make this a comprehensive comparison between all the different styles that I listed because there's a lot. But if you just want to spend a minute to think about a Fender P bass versus something like a Spectre or something with an active EMG split P pickup, that's a crazy amount of difference between the two. you know, there's some similarities, but there's that. Fender is completely passive, old school wire, Alnico magnets, right? And then Spectre not only uses an active ceramic EMG pickup, but runs it through additional active stuff, right? It's their own preamp situation. It used to be a Has, then it was a tone pump, all this stuff, right? And those are very drastically different. But if you want that Spectre sound, like that's the way to go. I'm on this journey of trying to figure out, like, could I take my Schecter P Custom, which is passive, and make it sound like a Spectre? I don't know. That's worth checking out in another video. As the emphasis of my video is not on the booster cut options of the controls that you have here, I'm leaving my EQ flat. I'm going to compare different pickup settings, and I'm going to leave my passive tone turned all the way up for the first part. Maybe I'll play around with that in a minute. But what I really want to see is, again, the tonal differences of just having it there, period. And the more I talk about this, the more I think G&L really gets it. Their L2500 and 2000 basses use an active preamp just to give you a different tone without giving you the boost options, which I think is really cool. All right, so first, active, both pickups. Passive. All right, let's do it. Neck pickup, active. Passive. All right. Here's what I'm going to try, because I'm in this certain kind of setting and I'm recording this DI'd. Here we go. All right, so this is going to be slapping on both pickups because I really want to emphasize treble. So first slapping, then I'm going to play a little on the higher strings. So both pickups, active. Passive. Alright, now same thing, both pickups, but I'm just going to play a little on here. Passive. So passive. There, I'm really starting to actually hear it picked like this. This is kind of the worst case scenario for testing something like this, which is the point, actually, is to have a simple one chord to an interface, which is right here, by the way. Boom. One chord to an interface, no extra pedals, no, fancy anything, right? This is the sort of situation where actually passive pickups should shine, and I should be able to tell the least difference. And it took me a little bit to actually hear the difference, but I definitely hear it when I'm picking like that on here. So I'm going to pause this part and I'm going to review what I recorded. So yeah, every single one of these examples, I heard a decent amount of treble roll off like immediately when I kicked it into passive mode, which is good. It's good to confirm what I already thought, but hey, you know what? I like finding out that I'm wrong about stuff too. A quick note about this bass so you'll know what you're hearing for it. These are EMG 40HZ pickups. Don't let the pole pieces confuse you or scare you. They are not real actual poles. This is a run of pickups that they did just because I guess somebody liked the look. So these are passive pickups. This is a Tone Monster preamp. The volume, blend, and tone are passive controls. Then you have mid, bass, and treble all here. Okay, when you do this, it bypasses all these controls, right? So that's all I'm doing in this video is going active to passive. These all have a notch in the center, right there, and right here. Everything is set in the notch, and this tone knob is all the way up for everything you hear. This preamp also has a cool option where there's a block on the inside that you can set to have a boost just going into active mode, but then when you pull up, you'll actually lose signal. I have that set where both signals are the same volume, but even having it set where active and passive are the same volume, you can tell what I'm talking about with treble roll off.